Welcome once again. This is Pastor Zach Bible Nuggets. Today, I welcome you again in chapter 25 of Genesis. Last time we talked about chapter 24, the marriage of Isaac and Rebekah. It was a lengthy story of 67 verses today. And like we said last time, we are not going to be going verse by verse because we want to make the videos shorter. I've heard you, and that's what we do. The concept is just to make sure that we understand the story or the narrative in the chapter, and not only the narrative, we also need to know how to apply that word and to learn from it. So today we're talking about the death of Abraham, and we'll also be talking about Jacob and Esau. They will be born. I'll give a preview of what I would call the summary of the chapter. So this marks the transition of Abraham from the life he have had with his previous wife Sarah, who has died, and now the other thing we learned is that he already gave his inheritance to Isaac, all that he owned. That is what we know. And you also remember he had released Hagar and together with Ishmael, so he remains a bachelor at this point. And this is very intentional. We looked at it earlier when he was sending his servant to go and look for a wife for Isaac. It was very intentional of him to do that because it was an agreement between him and Sarah, and indeed also God, that the inheritance of his estate is going to go into Isaac. And before Sarah died, she had that come out very clear in terms of what she demanded. And what we saw is that Abraham had to release Ishmael together with the mother Hagar, so that they are no longer his concubine or servants of Sarah. And so that meant in the Hebrew culture that the Ishmael lost any chance of inheriting the estate of Abraham. But we also learned that they were given gifts, and so they were not sent out empty-handed. The other thing we know is that now Isaac owns everything, because the servant of Abraham, when he went to look for Rebekah, somehow he mentioned that Isaac has taken up everything that Abraham owned. And we asked ourselves why. For two reasons: because Abraham wants to marry, and that is what we are seeing in this chapter. So we have the entrance of Keturah. And the other thing is that Abraham could have thought that he's about to die, but we are seeing him live another 35 or so years. So this chapter generally talks about that. Now, after Sarah, Abraham marries Keturah and has children, 6 of them, and he has given his main inheritance to Isaac, his promised son. And then before his death, because Abraham is seen, or we are seeing his death in this chapter, he sends the other sons away. So even though he has remarried Keturah and they have sons together, he's going to send them away because they are not supposed to live together with Isaac, because Isaac is going to be the inheritor of the land of Canaan. So the Bible tells us that he sends them towards the east. And then the chapter also briefly outlines the descendants of Ishmael. We've been talking about Ishmael, but we have not known his family, his descendants. And so this chapter tells us about that, and showing the fulfillment of God's promise that he would become a great nation with 12 rulers. You remember while he was crying in the wilderness for lack of water, God came and answered that cry, not only for him, but also the mother. And part of what God said at that point is that he is going to become a father of 12 tribes. So we're going to be seeing those in this chapter. The other thing is now focus shifts from Abraham, because he has died. And so we're going to be shifting our focus onto Isaac and his sons, that is Jacob and Esau, and that starts in this chapter. And we are also seeing Rebekah is unable to get children initially. They have lived for 19 years while Rebekah is still barren and she's not able to conceive. But we are also seeing in this chapter while Isaac is praying unto God that God may open her womb, and it happens. But we are also getting introduced into something new, a new challenge, in that she will have twins, and right from her womb, they are struggling and fighting. And God reveals that there are two nations that are in her womb, and that the older will serve the younger. We are going to be zooming into that statement to understand what does it mean for the older to serve the younger. So Esau, the firstborn, becomes a hunter, and he becomes the favorite of Isaac, his father, while Jacob is quieter and peaceful, and he's favored by Rebekah, his mother. So this is what we would call a dysfunctional family. It's a family that is divided and not collaborative in every area. They are like of having camps behind each other, and this ends up costing them a lot. And this family becomes what I would call dysfunctional, not functioning ideally, and not functioning really well. So Esau enters hungry and is asking for food from his brother Jacob, and then Jacob takes this opportunity now to buy the birthright from Esau. So he says, I'll give you the meal, but you know what, give me the birthright. That was too much to ask, but either way, Esau had to do it. You know, the Bible says that he despised, that is the word that the Bible uses. He despised his birthright, and so he transacts his birthright for food. And so without much ado, I'll go back into the chapter and just touch a very few verses. Want to make the videos as short as possible, so that you don't spend a lot of time, but we can be able to do that without losing the materials, the narrative in the chapter, and not only the narrative, the application, and what is the meaning of that word in our lives today. So if you look at right from verse 1, we are introduced to Keturah. Abraham took another wife whose name was Keturah. We are also introduced to his sons, and they are listed there. In verses 2, we have Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, Shuan, and Jokshan. Jokshan becomes the father of Sheba. You remember the queen of Sheba, and you probably have noted another name here that might strike you. It's called Midian. This is where Moses later gets a wife, the Midianites, you remember. So they are collaborators with the nation of Israel, but later they contend with them and fight. And so that is how we know them. That's their legacy. If you look at verse 4, the sons of Midian are listed there. I don't want to go to them. But let's go to verse 6. But to the sons of his concubines, Abraham gave gifts while he was still living, and he sent them away from Isaac his son eastward to the land of East. Like we said, Abraham did not want Isaac to be surrounded by the sons of the concubines. And remember, here they are mentioned as concubines. So they are two, not one. So Keturah is one, and Ishmael, or rather Hagar, is the other concubine. What we are going to be seeing, if you look at verse 7, these are the years of Abraham's life that he lived. 175 years. Abraham breathed his last and died in a ripe old age, an old man satisfied with life, and he was gathered to his people. So we are talking about his death, and at the point of his death, we are realizing that Ishmael and Isaac are working together. They are in good working relationship. At least we know they are relating, or they are talking. They are not enemies. In verses 7, we are introduced to the death of Abraham, and basically like to tell us, today, if you die, you do not stop to exist. Look at what the Bible says. He breathed his last in a ripe old age, and that was promised also. God had promised him that he's going to live to satisfaction, but he dies as an old man satisfied with life. So it's a promise fulfilled, and he was gathered to his people. So he went somewhere. So when you die, you do not cease to exist. You know, there are some teachings. There are some people who teach that when you die, probably you just vanish, and that is the end of you. Look at what the Bible says about death. We are going to be looking at that from the book of Matthew. So if you look at Matthew chapter 8 and verses 5 to verses 8, the Bible says, actually all the way to verse 11, and when Jesus entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him, imploring him, or rather beseeching him, and saying, Lord, my servant is lying paralyzed at home, fearfully tormented. Jesus said to him, I'll come to heal him. But the centurion said, Lord, I'm not worthy to come under your roof. I've read that chapter so that you understand the context. And you go to verse 11, that is my interest. I said to you that many will come from east and west and recline at the table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. So Jesus is talking many centuries after Abraham, and he's saying that many will come and recline at the table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's why we call God the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Where we are reading, we are not yet to the point where he is called the God of Jacob. But we are going to see an encounter that Jacob will have with God that will make him from that point be called the God of Jacob. But Jesus is talking about this God, who is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and he introduces the topic of heaven. So when you die, we know there is a life beyond these physical lives. And so he says, I say unto you that many will come from the east and west and recline at the table with Abraham. So when you die, you do not just cease to exist. There is life after that. And we'll be talking about that probably later when we'll be talking about what happens when a person dies. I think it's good we take that as a subject and deal with it. But I want to go back into verses, into verses 9. Then his sons Isaac and Ishmael, like we said, they're in good working relationship, buried him in the cave of Machpelah. You remember this Machpelah? A cave is the land that Abraham bought or redeemed from Zohar the Hittite. He mentioned again in this chapter, and we are told where it is. It is facing Mamre. So this is the field that Abraham purchased from the sons of Heth, and Sarah was planted there. That's the word we used in talking about her death. She's planted there because this is the land that the children of Israel will come to inherit later and conquer it through Joshua. And it came about after the death of Abraham that God blessed his son Isaac, and Isaac lived by Bera Lahai Roi. And so we are told about where he's living. I jump to verse 13, and these are the names of the sons of Ishmael by their names and in order of their birth. So they are mentioned there, and I'm not going to read them. There's not much mentioned about them after this, but at least we know it's a promise fulfilled that he got 12 sons, or rather he has 12 tribes and 12 nations out of that. I want to go to verse 19. These are the records of the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. So Abraham became the father of Isaac, and you wonder why is the Bible taking us back to this? Because this is something that the Bible have recorded earlier. And this is just the formula of the Bible. Anytime the Bible is introducing to us a new character or a new event, for example, the introduction of the Tower of Babel, the introduction of the story of the Ark of Noah, anytime when God is introducing new events, it goes back into recapturing the genealogical material that is revolving, of the people that are revolving around that event. That is basically why the Bible is taking us back to the birth of Isaac. And if you look at verse 20, and Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean, the sister of Laban, the Aramean, to be his wife. Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was barren. And the Lord answered him, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. But the children struggled within her, and she said, if it is so, why then am I this way? So she went to inquire of the Lord, And the Lord said to her. So before we hear that, it's good just to straighten that and say that Rebecca has been barren for 19 years, because like we're going to be seeing, these children will be born when Isaac is 60 years, and he got married, or rather he married Rebecca when he was 40 years. For 20 years is the gap between the marriage and the birth of their twins. So we talk about 19 because the 20th year rather is about the conception and the birth. So she has conceived, and finally she knows that she'll be a mother, but she doesn't know that she has twins inside her. One thing we realize here is that when this issue rises, like it happened to Abraham and Sarah, is that they took matters into their own hands, and they brought in Ishmael, or they brought in Hagar, and Ishmael is born. And so we later realized that this was not in the will of God. In fact, the Bible says that Ishmael was born according to the will of the flesh. But in times of Isaac, something different happens. The Bible says that he prayed unto God, and God opened the womb of his wife Rebecca, and she conceived. But something comes up. We are told very fast after conception. In fact, in the next verse, one verse is about conception. The next verse is about her inquiring from the Lord, what is happening in my womb? Because there is a struggle. And listen to what God says, because this is very important. It will help us understand the next chapters and the struggle between Jacob and Esau. This is what God says. 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples will be separated from your body, and 1 people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. Now, I know we understand all that, but I want to highlight just the last part. The older will serve the younger, because this is a Hebrew saying, but it was not said in the order that is it's put here. It's supposed to read, the younger will serve the older, but God turns it around and says the older will serve the younger. What does that mean? Now, we talked about the birthright earlier, and we said when we are talking about the birthright in Hebrew culture is that if you had 3 sons, you had to divide your inheritance into 4 portions. And then after you have given each of the 3 sons their portions, you take the extra one and give it to the older son, or at least to the person who is selected to take the birthright. I'm saying the one who is selected because it was not always that the firstborn received the birthright. You remember the times of Jacob when he was blessing his 12 sons. I think it's Genesis 49. He did not give the birthright to the first son, Reuben. Why? He said Reuben slept with his concubine. So there was an exception. There were exceptions where you had to give either the firstborn the birthright because he was first online to receive the birthright. And if it didn't happen that way, you had to give a reason in the ceremony of giving the birthright. You had to put across a reason why it had to go to another person. And actually, Jacob does it when he's giving it to Joseph, and he calls him a prince. You are a prince among your siblings. And he explains why Joseph, he says he's like a donkey in the winter. And it's not an insult, it's a compliment. Because he says that to mean in terms of his movement, he's firm-footed. He's not, if you compare a donkey and a horse, the donkey is firm-footed. You look at the way the donkey moves, especially when it's wet, it's very firm. But the horse, it's very jumpy and it's likely to slip. So when Jacob tells Joseph, you are a donkey, or rather he compares him to a donkey, he means he is firm-footed. And that is the reason why he was to receive the birthright, or rather he received the birthright. So anytime it's going to someone else, not the firstborn, there had to be a reason, there had to be a ceremony, there had to be a justification as to why the birthright does not go to the firstborn. And so in this case, God is saying the birthright is not going to the firstborn. So they are struggling. Actually, the reason why they are struggling in the womb is because the younger want to come out first. Later we are going to be seeing it, that he actually came out grabbing the heel of Esau. So Jacob came out grabbing the heel of Esau, and he came out as the secondborn. But the Bible says that the older will serve the younger, meaning the birthright that we are talking about shall go to the younger and not to the older. Why would God do that? Of course, we say that God does not live in time and it's not limited by time, but he can see beyond what we can tell in the present. So he's able to tell what will become of them, not because he has predestined Esau to this kind of a life. Remember what God has given us. Part of what God has given us that is very powerful is the power of the will. So later, we'll be looking at the character of Esau and the character of Jacob. And because I don't want to get ahead of myself, look at verse 24. When her days to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, there were twins in her womb. Now the first came forth red, and all over like a hairy garment, and they named him Esau. So they named him just because of his appearance. And then look what happens afterward. His brother came forth with his hand holding on to Esau's heel. So his name was called Jacob. And Isaac was 60 years old when he gave birth to them. So that is how we tell the gap of the barrenness of Rebekah, so to speak, because they got married at 40. The birth comes at the age of 60. But another important thing is that they are named here. Jacob will be changed later. God will change his name to Israel. And Esau is named just by the way he appears, a hairy man, and he's red. So these people are different in the way they appear. They are different in many diverse and very distinct ways, including their character and later including their behavior. We are going to be seeing them as one, a responsible person who is Jacob, and an irresponsible one. Maybe you are asking yourself, how do you know that? If you look at verse 27, the boys grew up. Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the field, but Jacob was a peaceful man. And you remember, Isaac is a very rich man. He has taken the inheritance that he took from his father Abraham, very rich with livestock and the estate of his father, and he's rich, so he needs someone to take care of his estate. And we are seeing Jacob rising to the occasion and taking good care of his estate. That is why the Bible is saying that he was living in tents. And remember, this was the same thing that happened to Abraham. He was living in tents, taking care of livestock and taking care of his wealth, his camels, and everything that he had. We said camels was a sign of wealth. They were not with many people. Very few people had camels, but these people had, this family had. But even with all this kind of wealth, look at verse 28. Now Isaac loved Esau because he had a taste for game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. This is a family that I would call kind of a dysfunctional, almost dysfunctional family. A family where the mother liaises with one son against the will of the father, and the father also liaising with another son against the other son. Verse 28, now Isaac loved Esau because he had a taste for game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. When Jacob had cooked stew, Esau came in from the field, and he was famished, or rather he was very hungry. That tells you that though he was a hunter, he didn't have a system even for food. He comes very hungry, so he doesn't have food, and that tells you that there are times that he even didn't come with anything. So hunting doesn't mean that he benefited from it. Probably there are times when he hunted and didn't catch anything, because we are seeing him not only as hungry, but as a person who has nothing that he can trade food for. So the only thing he has and he probably thinks he has, but he doesn't have, is his birthright. And his brother Jacob takes advantage of that. Look at verse 30. And Esau said to Jacob, please let me have a swallow of that red stuff there, for I am famished. Therefore his name was called Edom. Edom simply means red. So he's a red man, and he's asking for those Egyptian red lentils. In our language, we call them dengo, the red dengo. And so this man is hungry, he has nothing to eat, and he's ready to trade anything for food. But Jacob said, so Jacob realizes the moment, and he says, now this is the time that I'm going to ask for what is extremely expensive. So look at what he says. First, sell me your birthright. For food, probably you're asking, could you do that to your brother? But remember, this is a story that all of them are probably aware of what is happening. Rebecca is aware, Jacob is aware, the father is aware, because when the mother was told by God what is happening, he went and reported to the father. This is what God said to me. So Isaac is aware of the intention and the will of God in terms of birthright, and he knows whom he's supposed to bless, or rather who he's supposed to give the birthright. So verse 32, Esau said, behold, I'm about to die. So of what use then is the birthright to me? And Jacob said, first swear to me. So that he swore to him, and he sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank and rose and went away. Thus, the Bible says, the very last part of verse 34, thus Esau despised his birthright. So when we are talking of the birthright be taken over, only when there is justification for it. God knew the justification for this. One is the sense of irresponsibility that we are seeing in Esau. So Esau is not depicted as a very responsible person. And I think we skipped some part that could help us be able to shed some light on this. Now, to help us understand their behavior and their character, if you look at verse 27, when the boys grew up, Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the field. Jacob was a peaceful man. And so the Bible highlights their main characteristic. One, Jacob was peaceful. That probably tells you that Esau was not peaceful. And we have evidence about that. If you look into the next chapter, he's thinking of killing his brother. That is the reason why Rebecca proposes to Isaac that they sent their son Jacob out of their home and to go back to their uncle in the name of getting a wife. But the main reason why this idea is born is because Esau wants to kill Jacob. So this is not a peaceful man. The other thing we are seeing is that he is not a responsible person, because he's spending his life in the field. And in these days, in the Hebrew culture, this hunting we are talking about, as much as the Bible says that he was a skillful hunter, it was a sport. It was not a career. So this is a man who does just what he wants. And I think the father is an enabler into this. He really loves him and he loves his game. But who takes care of the livestock? Who takes care of the property? Who takes care of everything that is? And remember, Isaac was a very rich man. So the person who is taking care of this well and the person who is responsible is actually Jacob. But that is not to say that he was predestined to be a person of this character. You know, there is a cult that is called Calvinism that teaches about what is called predestination, meaning that God has chosen what you become. But this is not the case, because as much as God is able to do everything, he has given what is called the power of the will. So as much as you are subjected to different conditions in life, God gives you the will. Choose. You choose between good and bad, and that decision is purely on you. And whatever you choose, God respects that. And that's why there shall be judgment. Judgment will be there because people will have to choose in this life what kind of a life they want to live, what do they want to believe. And so judgment will be about the decisions we made out of self-will. The other thing that we may have skipped to mention is verse 8. Abraham breathed his last and died in a ripe old age, and a man satisfied with life. Now, talking about choice and talking about our choices, what we choose to do in this life. If you look at verse 8, it tells us then in that case, when we have chosen what kind of a life to live, there is life after this. And you know what? You only have up to your deathbed to choose what to do, because after that, there will be no more choices. What will be there is judgment. And Jesus talks about it in the book of Matthew chapter 5, and I'll be looking at verses 5 to verses 11, but I will not read the whole of it. And Jesus went and entered Capernaum. A centurion came to him, imploring him, rather beseeching him, and saying, Lord, my servant is lying paralyzed at home, fearfully tormented. Jesus said to him, I'll come and heal him. But the centurion said, Lord, I'm not worthy for you to come under my roof. Just say a word, and my servant will be healed. I say to you that many will come from east and west and recline at the table. I've jumped to verse 11. Recline at the table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. So there is another kingdom. There is another life. So after the death of Abraham, we are told he went somewhere else. And I want to tell you the same. After we die, after the life of this world, after you have your body has been put into the grave, you know, your spirit will go somewhere. And the Bible is telling us that he was put together with his people. And who are the people of Abraham, by the way? They are the people of faith. Jesus also talked about it in a parable in the book of Luke. It was a parable that had real characters, that is Abraham and Lazarus. And the Bible says that when they died, they went somewhere. And in fact, they were in a conversation. And the rich man was talking to Abraham and saying, please send Lazarus to go and dip his finger into the water and cool my tongue. And you know, basically like to tell you that there is a place where the righteous go, and there is a place where the people who have chosen the way of unrighteousness goes. So it's up to you to make a choice, but you can only make it while you are living. So going back to our very conclusion of this chapter, and this is where we are going to end it, the Bible tells us that thus Esau despised his birthright. We'll be reading more about it, and date with me next time to see what it means and what followed. It's an interesting story. So next time we are going to look briefly into where Isaac settles in Gerar, and we'll be talking more about the journey of Jacob going back to his uncle's place, to get a wife, and that is what he's commissioned to go and do by his father Isaac. But also we'll be looking at what kind of an experience he had on the way, where he went, you know, and slept somewhere, and God comes to him, and he's now becoming God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So when we read about what Jesus says in the book of Matthew chapter 5, 8 to 11, we are talking of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. At this point, he has not yet become. And so next time we are going to look at that. We are going to be looking at that and see how did he become the God of Jacob? What kind of an encounter did he have? So God bless you and welcome. Looking forward to seeing you again as we look into the next chapters. And we said we are no longer doing verse by verse, because we want to focus on making the videos shorter. And I believe we are doing justice to the chapters by extracting the whole topic or the whole spirit in summary. God bless you and see you again.